So by then I'm really researching because doctors don't have any answers for me, and they I can't be on drugs my whole life, and I hadn't been, since right after the surgery. So my only answer was to do nothing. So while I sat there for months and years, I just read, and I stumbled across news about the first case to go to trial related to the Pinnacle metal and metal hip, my hip. And in the second case to go to trial, one day I found the name of the surgeon I had been seeing, who kept telling me that the Pinnacle was great. And come to find out, the company, Johnson & Johnson Depew, had been paying him $607,000 in 1 year alone, just as a consultant. Like, he didn't develop the device, he didn't invent the device. So I thought, well, no wonder he's telling me it's a great device. Like, he's getting so much money from the company. So that was kind of the first, I got a little dizzy when I read that. I read how Johnson & Johnson was trying to use him, my surgeon, as an expert witness testifying against a man who had my same hips, who was suing Johnson & Johnson. So they were asking this doctor to testify against his own patient. And at that point I thought, who are these people? Who is this doctor who would do that? And at that point I realized that maybe what he had told me, that the Pinnacle was so awesome and that it was nothing like any of the other problematic devices, maybe that wasn't true. Let's see. So all along I had extreme pain when I stood. I hurt too when I laid down, but it was definitely much worse when I stood. When I tried to bend over, like to load or unload the dishwasher, I would feel like clunking, and then when I'd stand up again, I'd feel like clunk back, and it was just a horrible, unnerving, icky feeling. And I told my doctor about it. He didn't, he just didn't have any answer for me. Extreme pain, extreme ringing in the ears that has persisted to this day. A lot of memory loss. When I tried to go back to work, I only made it a couple weeks. I just knew, I couldn't stand the pain. I couldn't do what I used to be able to do. And when you don't get better from a surgery that people for decades have gotten better from in a couple weeks, and it's 8 months later and you're still not better, everyone just assumes you're faking. And I wasn't, but I also couldn't explain what was going on. One of my last days of work, I had a doctor's appointment, and on my way back, I got lost. I was on the main interstate, and it was a town I'd lived in for 14 years. It was a route I drove every day, and all of a sudden I was just like, where am I? And my first thought was, wow, this is a lot like my stepfather used to have when he had Alzheimer's. It was really scary, it was really embarrassing, but stuff like that started to happen to me a lot. I would just forget appointments, get lost, walk into a room and have no idea why I'd gone into the room. And it was spooky because it was so sudden onset. It was not like me. I've always misplaced my keys or lost my purse, but that sort of thing hadn't happened to me yet. Also, since from the time I had surgery, I had boils all over my face, chest, upper back, and arms. And it wasn't acne. They would just swell and crack open and bleed, or they would ooze clear fluid. So, again, I didn't know what was going on. I would have huge mood swings. Like, I would say swings, but they were never really happy, but I just had periods of extreme anxiety and panic. And I described it to my husband like, I feel like I'm a raging drunk and I can't control myself, but I'm not drunk, I'm not on drugs, I just don't know what's going on with me. And at one point I said, you need to take these kids and y'all need to go somewhere else where you don't have to be around me, because I don't know what's wrong with me. Something's wrong with my brain. That's how I described it. And that was the worst part. It's just how it hurt my family. And what I think was, I was reacting to the metal, and my brain was reacting to the metal severely in that initial phase, which is called the bedding in process, where the device kind of self-sands and creates more metal debris. That's supposed to last a year for people. I think it lasted longer for me because I had so much pain. I didn't move much. So I didn't get to the point at which it was completely a spherical object that matched the inside of the dome of the cup. I don't know. But at 4.5 years, for some reason, rather abruptly, I started to be able to stand and walk a little bit better. And my skin cleared up, and the what I would call like extreme anxiety attacks went away. So, through all this, I couldn't work. I lost my career. A lot of people figured I was just faking, and so I lost a lot of relationships. At one point, we moved 1,200 miles away because we noticed I did a little better in the summer. So we moved our whole family to Texas, where it's sunnier, thinking, maybe I'll do better there. And we had just, when you don't walk well, you're certainly going to have a hard time moving and packing boxes, and we had little kids. So at one point when unpacking here in Texas, I found a box, and it had a bunch of mail that we had just packed, And I went through it, and I opened it up, and my initial surgeon had sent me a prescription for narcotic painkillers. And no note, nothing. And that's illegal. And I wish I'd saved it, but I was so disgusted I just threw it away, because it was like, just get out of my hair. Here's a prescription. I didn't want a prescription. I wanted to know why I was hurting all the time after I had had both hips replaced with these devices that he said would never have to be replaced again. He told me when I came out of surgery, Frances, what we put in you, they put it on simulators and they move it more steps than you could ever take in a lifetime. And they took it off and there was no wear on it at all. And he also told me about studies that said that 5 years out, all these hips were still in place, that they had just gone so well that they would never have to be replaced. And I found out later at the trial, at some of the trials I went and attended, that data was just completely fabricated, embellished, and paid for by the company selling the devices. I kept saying to a doctor who was kind of generally treating me, not a surgeon, but a doctor I considered a friend, I kept saying, am I going bipolar? And he's like, you don't go bipolar. And I'm like, he's like, you're just in an awful time and you have chronic pain. I asked to be evaluated by I asked a neurologist to evaluate me because I thought, am I bipolar? But I think it was anxiety related to what the metals were doing to my endocrine system, because they have a huge effect on your thyroid, and that was already out of whack for me. And then it became harder to manage, and basically when your thyroid goes off, you have the symptoms of, when your endocrine system's out of whack, a lot of times it feels like anxiety or depression, because if you're hyperthyroid, you have symptoms of anxiety, and you're hot and you're sweaty and you're anxious and you run around like Barney Fife. And if you're hypothyroid, you're sluggish and your hair falls out and you want to sleep all the time and you're depressed. So suddenly it became much harder to regulate my thyroid medication for an autoimmune thyroid disorder. So I saw numerous doctors and finally concluded nobody really knew what was going on with these things, and that I was going to have to figure it out for myself. One of the doctors that said everything was great, turns out he made more than $500,000 a year in addition to his normal like surgeon job, just getting paid by the drug company. And I started to get a really bad feeling. Well, how many of the other doctors are on payroll with Johnson & Johnson? So at that point, Affordable Care Act passed. In it's a provision called the Sunshine Act. It allows you to look up your doctors and see from which companies they're taking how much money for what reason. And I was really stunned when I saw how many doctors were being paid so much money by the companies that make these devices. And I think that's the worst part of all of this, is that, you know, not only did they steal 4 years of me being able to function at a time when my kids were little and it was their first memories of me. Like, my kids were 6 and 4 when I had my first surgery, and when I had